When tragedy strikes, when we lose our health and our loved ones, or we experience trauma, we often wonder, is God really going to be there for us? I think it's just human nature. No matter how many times he's proven himself faithful in the past, circumstances can shake everything we believe about his goodness. So what happens when you find yourself in the middle of one of the worst genocides in human history? Can you trust God then? Radha Manickam, a new believer in Jesus, lived through Cambodia's killing fields, and his dramatic story is shared by journalism professor and writer Les Sillars in his book, Intended for Evil. He joins me today. Les, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, now, how did you meet Radha, and why did you want to tell this story?
Well, I was standing in the hallway at Patrick Henry College, where I teach, and a colleague of mine, David Aikman, he was a longtime reporter for Time magazine, he says to me one day, he says, you should call this guy. He had heard about a Christian who had lived through some incredible things during the Khmer Rouge. And I didn't know what the Khmer Rouge was. I'd seen a movie once in high school, the Killing Fields. But I said, well, okay, so I called him. And Radha told me some incredible stories about his forced marriage, about seeing people sliced open, about just incredible deprivation. And I said, oh, that sounds like quite a story. Let me do some reading and call you back. And so I started reading about the Khmer Rouge. And I was both fascinated and horrified by what I found. Mm-hmm. The regime is easily one of the most totalitarian in modern history. No other regime has killed a quarter of its own citizens, of course.
Yeah, what stood out about that is a lot of times when you see genocide, it's one tribe against another tribe, you know, even within the same country. But this is literally like Cambodians killing Cambodians.
Yeah, it was
turning against themselves.
Very much. I mean, well, Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge had a vision for a utopian communist society, and they thought that we can create this, you know, if we apply enough force. And so they killed everybody who stood in their way. They thought they were reactionaries. They thought they were just simply not going to be a part of the new society, of the new socialist man that they were trying to create. And so they would kill people just in vast numbers and without compunction.
And this isn't unique in the world. We've seen genocides. We've seen people pursue this utopia. And this was 40 years ago. So why was it important for you to tell this story now, again, to teach people about it?
Well, the Radha's story itself is, of course, an incredible story. It's just a story of deprivation and hardship and faith and perseverance, even though he often didn't feel strong. He didn't feel faithful. But it's an amazing story, and I hope that I've told it well. But even more importantly today, I think that we have to recognize that the appeal of a utopian vision for a society still has power, even today, and I think even in our society. It's the utopian vision. That's what justifies horrible, horrible things that people do. That's what justified Stalin and Lenin. That's what justified Mao. I mean, that's what justified Hitler. You know, they all had a vision for an incredible society. That's what justifies ISIS. You know, they see themselves as creating the society that God wants. And so that's how you justify mass murder.
And you really explored in the book, you know, why they did so many terrible things in the name of utopia, why they felt like that was okay. What did they say? How did they explain that?
Well, they saw themselves as very much they were a part of a larger historical flow of communism that really did believe that communism was the wave of the future. Communism, the perfect communist society really would happen. They believed in Marx. They believed in dialecticism. They believed that history was moving inexorably towards this, and they were going to be the first ones there. They were going to be the first ones to set up the perfect communist society where everybody would be equal, everybody would be free, everybody would have all the food and things they needed to live. Everybody would be happy, and this is what they told people. This is what they told the Khmer Rouge soldiers and officers all the way on down the line. They said, "This is the vision for what we're going to achieve, but this is what we have to do to get there. You know, we have to eliminate everything that stands in our way, everything that is not consistent with this communist society." So
in the meantime, they're all starving. Like even the people who believed in it, or you know, don't have enough food.
Right.
None of it's working.
None of it's working.
And they keep pursuing it anyway.
They keep pursuing it. They were blinded by the vision, and Pol Pot and his circle. They really did believe that the reason they were failing was because they were being infected from the inside by traitors, by reactionaries, by counter-revolutionaries, and so they felt, well, what we have to do then is we have to find these people, root them out, destroy them, and once we do that, then we will be able to create our society. But of course, that wasn't why it wasn't working. It wasn't working because it was never going to work. And but in the end, they just kept up piling up bodies and bodies and bodies. And
getting more paranoid, killing their own people, their own leaders, their own soldiers.
More and more paranoid.
Well, over 1.7 million people died. Of course, they don't really know the real numbers, but that's just a guess. Now, Radha is somebody who had just become a Christian not too long before that happened. Tell me what happened to him.
Well, he was the son of a moderately wealthy businessman who lived in Phnom Penh. He'd been taking English classes, and his buddy said to him one time, "Hey, come to these other classes. They're free." So Radha thought, "Oh, free? Okay, sure." And it turned out that they were English classes that were being taught at a church. It was a Maranatha church by a couple of American missionaries, the Burkes, Todd and Deanne Burke. And he was there, and he heard the Gospel of John, and the more he saw the life of Christ in the people around him, the Khmer people, the Khmer believers that were there, the more impressed and convinced he became that the gospel really was true. And so in 1973, he gave his life to Christ. And then it was difficult, I think, with his family, who remained Hindu. At the time, he had a mother and father, of course, and 7 brothers and sisters. He was the oldest. But then the Khmer Rouge took over in 1975. And then it was the beginning of this reign of death, really, is what it was.
And you think about it, like I said at the top of this interview, any of us who go through hard times, sometimes our faith in God is shaken. We don't understand it. And he's, essentially a baby Christian. He hadn't had that long to really get grounded in his faith. And he's going through this terrible time. And there's this one scene, he's living in a work camp. They're living under this incredible fear. He sees these horrible things happen, and everyone's starving. So there's really nothing good going on. And he's on the top of a termite hill, and he's singing a song in English, which is punishable by death. And one of the soldiers asks him about it, and he thinks, "I'm just going to tell him the truth and die." What happens to him? It's an amazing moment.
Well, it is an amazing moment, and he's there, and he starts singing, "This world is not my home." And he knows, right? He's singing the song because he knows that if he's heard and they come over and ask him, they will think that it's English and they will kill him, because he's been tainted by Western individualism and he's singing Western songs. And so he starts singing, and a Khmer Rouge patrol comes over, and one of the soldiers, he's 14 years old. His name is Sal. He's carrying an AK-47, and it's a group of like 3 or 4 of them. And he says to him, "Comrade, what language are you singing in?" And Radha, he wants to die at this point. He weighs 90 pounds. He's absolutely wretched. He's out there in the rain. He's got one small blanket for covering. And he's absolutely had it. But he's just prayed to the Lord. He says, "Lord, if you're really there, you should help me now." And when Sal comes over and says, "What language are you singing in?" he doesn't really know why. He just lies, and he says, "Nothing. It's just some sounds I made up." And it's a decision that he makes to persevere in the face of horrible trials. He wasn't afraid to die, I don't think. It was the second time he'd thought seriously about suicide. But he just said, "No, this is what the Lord would want me to do." He didn't feel strong, He didn't feel faithful. He doesn't quite know why. He just feels like the Lord touched him at that point. And he said, "No, I'm just making up sounds." And the soldiers said, "Okay." And they went away.
And I know there's just different moments where he saw the faithfulness of God, answered prayer, God saying to him, "I have a plan for you," not understanding what that means, seeing 13 of his own family members get slaughtered, and why am I still here? But God saying, "I have a plan." Tell me about his marriage, because they kept trying to marry him off and it didn't work, right? And then he meets this woman.
Yeah, that was an amazing story. One day he's out plowing, and one of his group leaders comes into him and they say to him, "Comrade, we want you to get married," right? And he doesn't want to get married, right? Because he's skinny, he's weak, he's sick. He's not, "No, I don't want to get married." And but they set up the marriage anyways. And so he's part of a mass wedding. These were mass forced arranged marriages. And so on the day of the wedding, he's a part of a group that's led in. It's the men in single file, the women in single file, and whoever you are facing, that is who you're going to marry.
Nice.
And the woman takes one look at him and she shrieks, "No, not that one," and runs out of the room. And so he's kind of left there. Now, if he had tried that, of course, he'd have been killed, right? Because he can't do that. He's one of the old people. He's one of the he's suspect. But she was one of, or he was one of the new people. She was one of the old people, and so she was a communist sympathizer, and so she could get away with that.
Right.
So they say, okay, fine. So they tried again 3 more times.
Yeah.
And one woman says, one woman says, nah, he's too dark. One woman is given away to another old soldier just on that same day. Another woman runs away the night before, and he's like, well, maybe the Lord really is protecting me, you know,
because he doesn't want to be married.
He doesn't want to be married. He said, Lord, you know, if you're really there, you should help me. He was so frustrated. He said, I don't want to get married, Lord, and if you make me marry this woman, I'm not going to be a Christian anymore. That's what he says.
Wow.
And so when the weddings come up, he's not married. And the next year, they come back to him and they say, Comrade, we want you to get married. And this time, if you don't get married, we're going to give you your own plot of ground, 3 feet by 6, which of course is a grave.
Yes.
So this time he's saying, oh Lord, I got to get married this time.
Yeah.
And so it's the same kind of thing. He goes in, and the woman across from him, they get married. They say their vows to ANCA, which is the revolutionary organization, and they are married a month before they realize that they are both Christians. It is the most incredible thing.
I love it, and they're married to this day.
And they are married to this day. They have,
there they are right there, a picture of them.
Yeah, there's Radha and Samain. They live in Seattle. They have 4 or 5 children. I always get that confused.
And they minister in Cambodia to this day?
They do. After they got back, Radha became a pastor. And then he became a full-time missionary, and they live in Seattle. They travel back to Cambodia regularly to minister to Khmer pastors and churches there.
Well, there's so much more, and we're just about out of time, but just say something about the forgiveness aspect, because after he survived this and started a new life and moved to the U.S., he ran into a few different people that had killed his family, that he'd seen commit despicable acts.
Yeah, and actually he ran into them in the refugee camps in Thailand, of course, because lots of Cambodians, that's where they ended up after the Khmer Rouge fell. And I don't think, the way he tells the story, he didn't really say, I must forgive these people, but he ran into a number of people over time. And the first time he meets them, he meets someone who he believes was responsible for killing, some of his family members. He's very upset, but he hears the Lord telling him, no, I forgave you. You have to forgive this person. Mm-hmm. And he meets a couple of more people, and every time he meets somebody new, it's like the forgiveness is kind of soaked a little bit further into his heart. And so that by the end, when he meets somebody who he is sure is responsible for the death of his father, he sees the man, and the man is with his wife and the starving baby. And he gives the man some money that a missionary had just given him. And he said, you got to go ahead and take the milk, or take the money, buy some milk for your baby. I'm not going to turn you in. And to me, when Radha told me this story, he wasn't bragging about it. He was just saying, this is what the Lord, did in my heart. He didn't have a wild, or not a wild. He didn't have an incredible experience where he realized, now I forgive these people. He just, as he lived his life, the grace of God showed itself.
He had to make those decisions one by one. Well, there's so much more we could unpack about the story, but I think people are just going to have to get the book, aren't they?
Well, I certainly hope that they do.
It's Intended for Evil by Les Sillars. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here today.
And hey, if you're watching this interview today, whatever you're going through, just be encouraged that God is faithful even in the midst of evil, of horror, of pain, that you can reach out to him, that he has a plan for your life, just like he had a plan for Radha's life. We can forgive, we can have hope, even when you don't feel strong, like Radha didn't feel strong, but God was faithful, even when we're not. If you need someone to talk to, give our prayer lines a call, 1-866-273-4444. We'd love to encourage you on your journey.